Hi everyone, it's Nathaniel here from the Cider Link, and this is an interview with Sam Reid. And Sam is a man of many faces. He's the managing director of Willie Smiths. Willie Smiths, one of the most popular craft cider brands in Australia, based out of Tasmania. And he's also the president of Cider Australia as well, the not-for-profit body that protects and promotes the craft cider industry in Australia. So lots going on in this interview. We talk about many things such as the inception of Willie Smiths, where that came from, and Sam's thoughts and advice for people who are thinking to maybe start a cider business and what they need to be thinking about. And also what the role of Cider Australia is, why they exist, what they do, and why that's important. And that covers lots of different things, from wet tax all the way through to the Cider Awards, the biggest cider competition in Australia every year, what that's about, why it's important, and really how that came about. So lots in here, something for everyone. It's quite a chunky interview. Have a listen and let us know what you think. Cheers. Sam, welcome to the interview.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah, no worries. Now, we were talking a little bit before, and we kind of realised that there's actually probably too many things to talk about, because you're actually a really busy man. You're running Willie Smiths, you're president of Cider Australia, you're also putting on festivals. You must have been busy.
Oh, it's been a busy time, definitely. Not many cider producers would say they were that busy over winter, but we decided to have a midwinter festival down in the Huon Valley in Tasmania, which to wake up the dormant apple trees and scare away the evil spirits. You know, something I picked up from my travels around southwestern UK. So that's been keeping us really busy, and we're through the pack up of that now, and I suppose it's starting to, the spring is coming upon us now, actually, so starting to think about this coming summer, so exciting times.
Yeah, and all reviews from the festival have been really positive so far. Seemed to go down very well.
Yeah, we had we blew our minds. We had 14,000 people there this year over 3 days, and we were hoping to get 10, so yeah, it was great, and we're continuing to get more and more people down to Tasmania from the mainland, which is great news, and getting Tasmania re-established as the Apple Isle, or the Cider Isle, as we would like to call it.
And so that festival was at the Apple Shed, which was the home of Willie Smiths, and that's obviously the cider company that you're running. And it's probably safe to say, I mean, it's difficult to... I haven't seen any numbers on it, but it's probably safe to say that Willie Smiths is probably one of the most successful of the craft cider brands in Australia. Certainly in terms of where you can find it, it seems to be fairly well distributed. What's the story there? Like, how did that come about? How did you end up running a craft cider company?
Yeah, well, I think it comes down to, I was working in corporate for quite a while. I was probably finding that I wasn't necessarily the right fit for the corporate mould, as some people do tend to find over time. It's not for everyone. And so started thinking about, what else I could do outside of there. I was actually working in a drinks company, and a friend of mine came to me and said, well, let's do a cider. And I'm a very big fan of alcohol in general and the alcohol industry. And I thought, well, you know what? I love craft beer too, but there's a million craft beers out there, and they're doing a pretty good job, a lot of them. There's a fair bit of room for improvement, I thought, in the cider category in Australia. So that probably is what excited me to make, give Australians better drinking experiences through the production of a really, a high quality cider, of which there are more and more starting to get out there in Australia, which is exciting. And just, we want to obviously make a cider that is made using Australian apples and supports Australian agriculture versus, some of the big brands that are, importing concentrate mostly from China, and just making, I suppose, what you consider a cheap manufacturing versus producing a cheap product that is sweet and is probably perfect for the mainstream.
And so why Willie Smiths? I mean, their family business, been around for a few generations down in the Huon Valley. Were you friends with them, or how did that kind of come about?
Yeah, well, this friend of mine who came and said, let's do a cider, he knew Smithy, and he put us in touch. I'm from Tasmania, so that made a lot of sense to do something, in my home state, I guess. And yeah, I mean, Smithy and I and Glennie got along really well. He's a really great bloke. It's an amazing family, the Smith family, and really passionate about, growing the best apples they can. And they grow, probably one of the largest organic apple orchards in Australia. I was really interested in doing a quality product, the best possible product we could do. And it just seemed to be, a really natural mix, I suppose. So I remember we went out to the Mona Museum one day, and we were wandering around, having a look around there. It's an amazing place. If anyone's ever gets to Tasmania, which hopefully many of your listeners will, check out Mona Museum for sure. Really, lots of interesting, new and different stuff, and quite challenging stuff. And it just seemed like a really good setting to talk about what we might get up to in the future. And I suppose the rest, as they say, is history, albeit a very short one. But yeah.
So roll forward 4 years, Willie Smiths winning awards. You've got single varietal ciders coming out. Seems like it's been a fairly rapid progression, really, from those early beginnings.
Yeah, well, I think both Smithy and I both are from the school of if we're going to do something, we might as well fucking do it. Excuse the language, but no point messing around. And we're both neither of us are very good at saying no. So, we're pretty good at just saying yes to everything, and that's just kept us really bloody busy. But at the same time, I suppose that's how you grow a business as well. So.
And did you find there were things which you brought over from your corporate experience into the craft world, or was it completely kind of starting from scratch for you in terms of the way you went about growing the business?
Yeah, it's interesting. Look, I think when I started, I used to ask myself, what would I have done in my previous, or what would my previous organisation have done, and try and do exactly the opposite of that. When you're trying to make the best possible product you can, you've got to have a pretty clear vision, and it's got to be fairly single-minded, and you can't compromise. I just found, I suppose, in the corporate world that, there's a lot of people needing to make decisions, a lot of stakeholders, and you end up tending to compromise a lot. So I suppose from that perspective, I just thought, let's do the opposite of what you do in the corporate world. But obviously, you do get a lot of good learnings, about the industry and how to, I suppose how to be, setting a clear vision and strategy and for what you want to achieve, definitely. But yeah, it's not, you might just make slightly different decisions fairly regularly, I suppose. So, yeah.
Yeah. And you've mentioned a couple of times the quality of the product, and that's obviously coming through very strongly as something which is absolutely core to the Willie Smiths approach. What else for someone who maybe is making some cider and not yet commercialized it, not really selling it, and is thinking about doing that? Have you got any kind of hints or tips about things which maybe they need to consider if they're serious about actually turning it into a business?
Well, I think you've got to really be clear about what you want to achieve and where you want to go with it, I suppose. There's a lot of amazing cider producers in Australia who are very happy to make cider themselves and wholesale it themselves, and they're making some amazing ciders. I think of Clive Crosley from Red Sails, just down the road from us. He's been making cider for 40 years. I don't think he's got any aspiration, and in making amazing ciders using cider apples as well. Clive is very happy to produce, the best ciders he can with his orchard and sell them to people who really appreciate them. I guess when we started, we were a bit more, I don't want to say aggressive, maybe the wrong word, but we wanted to probably change drinking culture in Australia through taking some of these great ciders that are being made by maybe some smaller producers and getting them into the hands and mouths of people, Australia-wide, so that we can actually make an impact on the category and also on, I suppose, agricultural and regional Australia, because there's a lot of apples in Australia and a lot of them get wasted each year. And there's a lot of concentrate brought into Australia that probably doesn't need to be. And if less was brought in, we'd have a much more sustainable apple industry around Australia for sure.
Yeah, and it seems like that tide is turning, and it's still quite hard to find good craft ciders, but it's becoming more visible, I suppose, to people who are looking for it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. I mean, I've been president of Cider Australia for about 2.5 years now, and Cider Australia has been around for 4 years. We've kind of keep trying to step up each year. We've been fighting the good fight on labelling and making people aware of the differences between the ciders using imported concentrate and how ciders using Australian apples impact regional communities around Australia. And I think that's really an important message to land with people, with politicians as well, so they can understand that. Because cider is a lot like wine. The wet tax was basically set up to support regional agricultural communities, and we do the same because the apples aren't grown in central Melbourne or central Sydney. Obviously, they're grown in regions, and I firmly believe that the true soul of a nation exists and heart of a nation exists in the countryside, not necessarily in the inner cities, which are probably becoming reasonably homogenous around the world these days. So, we're passionate about supporting that, and so are many. And I think Australians are too. If they start to hear that story, they start to want to support that as well. So it's just about, mostly for us, it's been about hand telling, hand selling, and at every festival and event, and all the other members of Cider Australia, telling people at events and educating people about what real cider made from Australian apples is like versus cider that's made from imported concentrate, and it's just one drink at a time, I suppose, is the way we've been taking it.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important distinction, and it's something which we find we're talking about all the time now. Is what is a real cider? Because there's lots of products on the shelf that are called cider, and they're not all the same. So what's the view from Cider Australia on that? On what is a real cider or a craft cider?
Oh well, we're very clear that cider is made from the juice of fermented juice of apples or pears, if you're talking perry. And so it's not to say cider isn't concentrate. Cider can be made from concentrate because that's a very relevant part of the market. I think what we've been vocal about and advocating is really making sure people understand where the source of the fruit going into the cider or perry comes from. And I think that's because we believe consumers have a right and a choice to know, and can make their own informed choices if they do know. But currently, labelling's pretty poxy in Australia in cider, and you can't actually make an informed choice, which I think in 10 years' time, when we look back on this, we'll be shocked that was actually the case. But yeah, it is what it is at this stage. We have defined Australian craft cider as cider that is made from 100% Australian apples, basically. So,
yeah, and the country of origin thing is an interesting one for pretty much any product in the supermarket. You're going to know where the ingredients come from, or at least it will tell you if it's imported or not. But that doesn't seem to be the case with cider. Why do you think that is? What's the barrier there?
There's some pretty strong lobbying in the alcohol industry going on with some pretty deep pockets, I'd suggest.
And so, given that, I mean, do you think that is something that's going to change at some point?
Yeah, I think it can't stay the same. I absolutely think it will change. I think we're always after more truth and more honesty in labelling, in anything. It's the way the world is going. People don't want to be bullshitted to anymore, I believe. And so it will change in the future. I'm very confident of that. When it will change, I can't tell you that.
Yeah, but from a Cider Australia perspective, I mean, is it fair to say that is the main kind of objective of that body, is to be driving that agenda?
Well, yeah, we've driven that. Yeah, I'd say that's the one thing we've been focused. Well, the major kind of Well, no, we've got quite a few. Sorry, I should take a step back. That's the one thing we've been focused on heavily for the past year because there's been a bit, or 18 months, there's been a big inquiry into labelling. We've made a number of submissions. Obviously, lobbying for to maintain the wet tax for ciders, particularly ciders made from Australian apples, is another big key part of our agenda. And the other one is obviously the Australian Cider Awards, which are obviously the main cider awards in Australia, obviously open to Australian and international ciders, and running that every year is a really important part of our role to make sure we're continuing to benchmark and improve the quality of ciders that we make in Australia, because the better quality ciders we make, the more people are going to want to drink them and the more sustainable the category will become.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm keen to talk about that in a bit more detail shortly, but just to come back a step on what you said. So for someone who isn't really aware of the wet tax and what the implications of that are, in layman's terms, like why is that important to the craft cider industry or the cider industry?
Well, I think the difference between, say, brewing and cider making, which a lot of people don't necessarily, we get called brewers quite regularly, we ferment fruit. And so we are generally, 99% fruit in our ciders to make them, 99% fruit juice or more. And so what you need to produce fruit are trees. Obviously, that's not rocket science, but trees require planting, and then they take 3 years before they're bearing fruit, and 5 years before they're getting to a mature stage, and 7 years before they're totally mature and bearing. So, in the same way that vines take time to be put in the ground and mature, that's kind of working capital and money that you're putting down that you don't see a return on for 5 years, 7 years, and that's why that's what the wet tax and the wet rebate really try to enable and encounter for, to say, well, we recognise that your industry is very, very capital intensive because of this need to graft trees or plant trees in the ground, and so you guys need to be compensated for that with the wet rebate, I guess, and so that's what that's all about.
Yeah, so it's about protecting farmers and giving them some flexibility in order to be able to play a longer game, which is needed if you're planting orchards.
Well, that's it. I mean, cider is agriculture. In the same way that winemaking is sexy, but it's still agriculture, because until you grow the fruit, you don't have anything to make your product with. Obviously, beer being 90% water, you can get hold of that fairly easily, and then hops are growing on a very annual basis on vines. So from nothing to growing again. So it's not like there's a hugely capital intensive industry there in the hops, I suppose you'd say.
And so making a play on that and having an impact on that, I mean, that's effectively talking to the Treasury about the tax rules. I mean, it's quite a big it's quite
absolutely.
A big project to be undertaking.
Well, absolutely. We're obviously representing the cider industry, and we make the policy submissions, and whenever they're calling for tax submissions or white papers, which they've done quite a lot of white papers and green papers and other papers in the last few years, and we've obviously made sure we've been making submissions clearly on all of them for all of those things and representing the cider industry, definitely. We're fortunate to have a lady called Jane Anderson working with us on a part-time basis. She's got a really, really strong policy background. She basically runs Cider Australia and makes sure we put together really good papers and submissions to all of these governmental, I guess, questions. It's not the sexy stuff, I'll be honest with you. Having festivals and awards is a lot more sexy, and people love that and can see that.
Yeah.
But we think, and particularly as a young organisation, we're only 5 years old in Cider Australia, getting very, very clear on what Cider Australia's policies and points of view are was really important to do in the early days. And hopefully we're going to see ourselves being more front-footed in terms of, marketing activity and consumer engagement moving forward.
And I mean, you've mentioned publicly in the last few months that this year, 2016, is going to be the year of craft cider. What does that mean to you? What's that about?
Well, to be honest, I think it's about Cider Australia used to be, say we represented the whole cider industry. Now I think it's fair to say that we represent the craft and international parts of the industry.
Yeah.
And we're probably saying we're a lot more focused on our agenda, and have a much clearer agenda. Now we are focusing on that kind of, quality end of the market with the craft and international ciders, because there are so many great products out there, and it's also a lot easier for us to write policy papers where we're focused on, quality products, supporting, farmers in whether it be New Zealand, the UK, or Australia. That just makes a lot more sense to us now, actually. So we can proudly be out there and market ourselves that way.
And so you mentioned marketing out to consumers as well. I mean, do you see that as the next stage really for Cider Australia? What's that going to involve, do you think?
Well, I think it's just being a bit clearer about how we position ourselves with journalists and with our obviously press releases. But I suppose the biggest thing we'll be doing this year is our Australian Cider Festival, which is going to basically have, which is actually open to everyone, but it's going to predominantly focus on craft ciders made with 25 Australian and international craft cider producers. Would be held on the 8th of October, in front of the Malt House Theatre in Melbourne, just 5 minutes walk from South Bank.
Yeah, so let's talk about that in a bit more detail. And so it's a festival, it's a competition as well. It's really showcasing the best of the best, really, in Australian ciders. But that's a fairly recent thing, isn't it? How long have you been?
The awards.
Yeah.
It's been going as lot. Cider Australia was essentially formed to start running a festival, an awards program that was being judged, by cider makers, cider producers, and people who are passionate about the industry. First year it was actually all set up by James Kendall from Small Acres Cider and David Pickering, who are both based out of Orange and very, very passionate cider makers. James obviously doing it commercially, and David as, I suppose, an incredible resource from cider apple perspective, and very passionate about the industry and making his own cider for home consumption, of course. And so that's where it started about 5 years ago out in Orange, and the first awards were held out there, out at I think it was at James's place. I wasn't actually there, but and judged out there, and that was really the impetus for Cider Australia forming. And each year we've kind of since then had a international judge come out and help us. It's been really, really useful getting the perspectives of judges from Canada, from the UK, from the US as well, to get their points of view and understand how judging happens in their parts of the world. And and it was actually Gary Audie from the Great Lakes in the US who gave us a lot of great feedback, and we've kind of taken the Great Lakes guidelines, and they've formed the basis for our kind of show and judging guidelines. So in the US is being more of a new world style cider market in the same way Australia is. UK is obviously very developed, with about 13 to 14% of the market, alcohol market being cider in the UK. So versus Australia's 3%. So the US is probably we're a bit more similar like that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a great mark of credibility and respect for the market, I suppose, to be able to get international judges to come here to judge in Australia, and that's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, the beauty of the cider industry is that it is so small. It's not really like beer, which is dominated by some massive companies. I mean, it's regional producers at best generally, and that just makes it, I guess, a bit more family, a bit more friendly, and and people are willing to share, I guess, so, which is great, and very passionate about it too, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely, and like you say, bringing in some expertise from a different environment and different judging criteria and things like that. So
yeah, we've got Bill Bradshaw coming out this year from the UK, who co-wrote World's Best Cider with Pete Brown. So I met him when I was over there. He's a bit of a legend, actually. Takes amazing photographs and very well-respected cider photographer and writer. So he'll be judging this year, and he's not short of an opinion either. So it should be great to hear what Bill's got to say.
Yeah, it's really exciting. But Bill's from my neck of the woods as well, where I'm from in the UK. And
yeah, right. Okay. Yeah.
We've got an interview lined up with him as well, actually, coming up in a few weeks. So yeah, really excited about that. And that book has been mentioned by previous interviewees on here. Actually, a fantastic resource for people that are interested in cider, and like you say, beautifully shot by Bill as well. So pretty much they've gone around the world, tried as many ciders as possible, and written a book about it. I mean, amazing resource.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what's really exciting about that is just to show you that cider isn't cider. I mean, everyone knows that there's IPAs and pale ales and pilsners, and they all started in one country or another. And if you look at the cider industry, there's a bunch of different styles from around the world. That's never really united in one country, in one category yet at this stage, but I can see that happening in the future, where you start to, and that's where our awards are going too, where you start to see some ice cider and some, partnered with some Pommeau in the awards, and next door you've got some New World cider and then some traditional French style ciders sitting next to English scrumpies, it can be such a broad category, and I just, my big thing is trying to broaden people's knowledge of the category, because that's what makes it fun, really. And unfortunately, cider's probably still seen as a little bit one-dimensional in Australia. So,
yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the things that really shocked us when we first came here, was most ciders that we found all tasted the same, and a lot of people that we talked to about cider would have said exactly cider, isn't it all the same? And actually, then you put something like something using cider apples in their mouth, or something that's really dry, or completely still, and people are just completely blown away that's a cider. They don't expect it at all.
Exactly. I'm super excited to start to see more and more cider apples hit the market. Obviously, we won the cider awards last year with our first ever full cider apple cider, the 18 variety. And I'm hoping we're going to see quite a few more in the awards this year, and hopefully even more importantly, showing up at the festival the following day, so we can really start to show people the depth and breadth that can exist in cider. So.
Yeah, and that itself is quite a big topic, the whole topic of cider apples. But just from your perspective, why is that important? Why should people be thinking about ciders that have got cider apples in them?
Well, because I think they just make a better and more interesting product, really, at the end of the day. So, not to denigrate all the ciders made from culinary apples, because our cider, our main cider, Willie Smiths Organic, is made from culinary apples. But there's just certain things that you're never going to be able to extract from culinary apples that you can get, certain flavours and tannins and, mouthfeel that you're just not going to be able to get from culinary apples. So it's just going to broaden the category and make it open to more occasions, partnering, with fine dining restaurants, and, instead of having a wine, having a cider with your meal and things like that. So yeah. I think that's what excites me.
Mm. And that's what people have been doing for thousands of years in some parts of the world. And it definitely
exactly.
Super
they
sweet.
Didn't have grapes. They had to ferment apples instead. So no, that's what one of humans. One of the best things about humans is, doesn't matter where you are in the world, we've worked out a way to ferment something and get drunk on it in every part of the world. So
yeah. So for someone who maybe hasn't been to the awards before, been to the festival, and thinking about coming, what can they expect? What's going to happen? What's a good reason for them to get along and come to Melbourne and get involved?
Well, I think we're getting a company called Bottle Shop Concepts helping us run our festival this year. We're expecting about 1,500 people. And it's going to be, if you pre-buy the tickets, I think they're $35. That enables you to unlimited tastings throughout the day. We talked about a token model, which we've done in the past. We're throwing that out the door this year. And they won't be big tastings, but at least you'll get the chance of trying all these different styles and varieties of ciders out there. So, with 25 different cider producers, there's likely to be well over 100 different ciders on show there. So that's pretty exciting in itself, I guess. Keep an eye out for that. It'll be getting promoted fairly shortly, and we'll be launching ticket sales for that fairly shortly. And so I suppose that's what's really exciting about that. The awards have generally been quite an industry specific evening. That's not to say we can't open them up to other interested onlookers. So if you really are interested in coming along, just go to our website and send us a note, and I'm sure we can get you along. This year we're hosting the awards at upstairs at Craft & Co. in Collingwood, which is a fantastic venue that one of our sponsors actually has put together, Della Tafola, which showcases some of their brewery equipment, distillery equipment, and obviously they make great food and have great beverages on tap and in bottles.
So you're saying for $35 you can come and taste all the best ciders in Australia?
That's pretty much what I'm saying. It's a fairly compelling proposition, really, isn't it?
When you put it like that, I mean, why wouldn't you go? That's great.
Exactly.
Now, a little bit earlier on, you touched on the growth of craft beer, and it's fair to say that just like craft cider is booming globally, the same is true with craft beer, and craft beer probably, certainly bigger, but a similar trend, and the whole kind of craft movement itself is booming. I wonder if you've got what your perspective is on any similarities or differences between the way that craft beer market's evolving compared to the craft cider market.
Well, I think it's fair to say that craft beer has been going longer and has been a thing for much longer. The cider category in Australia is about the same size as the craft beer category in Australia in reality. So that's the total cider category. So it's taken some time for craft cider to get going, and we think there's still a long way to go. There's still many bottle shops, bars, and restaurants out there that may not have any, or maybe just have one or two craft ciders. So there's a long way to go, and we're I'd say about 5 years behind. But overall, look, I think it's driven by this trend towards wanting better quality. Less drinks, but better quality drinks. People aren't necessarily wanting to go and smash themselves with 10 stubbies of something a day or a night, when they could actually have 3 or 4 and probably get the same amount of enjoyment from those 3 or 4 and wake up feeling a lot better. I think that's part of it. And then as people's tastes evolve as well, I mean, I do remember a time when I used to think that Carlton Draft was the best beer in the world. That time has well and truly gone, as my tastes, I guess, have evolved over time. And I think, cider category is evolving, like the beer category, but perhaps instead of, people wanting more hops and more flavour, people are looking for something a little bit drier and with a little bit more, interesting character to it as well. So yeah, I guess we talk about it as on an axis of sweeter at one end and drier at the other, and kind of new world clean, crisper flavours at the bottom, and traditional style ciders at the top that have a lot more interesting character. So you can imagine, the category evolving from the kind of, so to speak, bottom left corner up to the top right corner, as more and more interesting flavours come into the market. Because I think the longer people spend in the category, they want to keep moving on. They want to keep looking for something. They'll often come back to their favourite, but they do keep wanting to explore. The alcohol category is exciting. People are looking for new experiences in it, and that's what craft beer's given to people, and I think hopefully craft cider will be able to do the same thing.
And are there any particular examples or specific examples that come to mind for you that someone who, let's say someone listening to this who is quite into craft beer, but maybe they don't know much about craft cider, or maybe they haven't even tried a craft cider, that are kind of comparable, or where there's a crossover? Like, for example, if you're an IPA drinker, would you particularly like a certain kind of cider? Like, is there anything like that which comes to mind?
No, I'm afraid I can't help you with that one. Look, I think if you're a craft beer drinker, then you're generally going to like, and it depends what kind of craft beer. Let's be honest, there's 1,000 different types of them as well. But if you like something really, I think it's probably people who like sour beers more are probably going to like some of the more interesting ciders out there, and particularly the cider apple ciders. People who like those kind of sour beers, and maybe even saisons, are potentially going to like, really interesting craft ciders more so.
Yeah, it was put to me recently that cider apples are to cider what hops is to beer, and that kind of added complexity and that added flavour component, that's where someone who's quite into craft beer could be quite tempted by a craft cider, because it offers the same kind of characteristics in the way that it tastes.
Yeah, well, and I think that makes perfect sense. I think I can, if you had to look for an ingredient, then definitely cider apples would be the one for sure. So, yeah. But I mean, I tend to think of it probably more as dryness. What hops or bitterness is more like, instead of being, it's more bitter, you get drier. So I tend to think of it more as the output more than anything else. So bitterness and dryness, I think, go together for me as well. And both of them are driven by hops, but not necessarily cider apples, I suppose.
So for someone who is looking to learn a little bit more about craft cider, have you got any thoughts on resources, useful websites or producers, or places to go for someone to actually learn a bit more?
Well, first of all, I'd say go and get Andrew Lee's book. I think it's called Craft Cider Making. And read that, because that's pretty darn helpful. He's got a website there as well. It's actually Craft Cider Making by Andrew Lee. Amazing book. Breaks it down very, very clearly and simply, and he's one of the most renowned cider authors in Australia. He's very responsive, actually, as well. If you wanted to call him up, or he's in the UK, but call him up or send him an email, he'll generally get back to you. And so that would be my first starting point. There's obviously the new Cider Maker's Handbook as well, which was released by Claude Jolicoeur, who came out last year and was a judge, and Andrew Lee was a judge 3 years ago. So we've had both of these guys out as judges, which is great. So that's another book worth having a read of. And yeah, I mean, once you've read that, I'd say have a go. It's pretty step by step, but if you really want some guidance, try and find someone locally and see if you can find a bit of a mentor, I suppose. But there are, in the Huon Valley where we're from, one of our friends had there's obviously a lot of apples in the Huon Valley. It used to be called the Apple Valley. But there is kind of craft cider makers or homebrew cider makers out there, all having a crack, and a lot of it, just a bit of trial and error, you'll get there. But Andrew gives you a fairly good step-by-step process to make it the best way you possibly can.
And so what's next for you? Obviously this year, big year for the craft cider industry. What does the future hold for you and Cider Australia and Willie Smiths?
Well, we're really hoping to announce a partnership with Horticulture Innovation Australia, HIA, at the Australian Cider Festival, where we can hopefully announce that all of our members who can go through the certification process will be able to license the 100% Aussie Apples logo and put that on their pack. So that should make it a lot easier for people to find, I suppose, Australian craft cider. We're really working hard with some retailers to educate them about the category and say, look, cider isn't just cider. How about you think about a craft cider category? So be nice to think we could actually get some retailers thinking about craft cider, because that will make it more widely available, which will then obviously support more growers and support more cider makers to go and put more cider apples in the ground and make more interesting styles as well. So that's obviously probably one of the main goals of what we're trying to achieve this year. And then, we've recently, I guess the other thing is we've recently put a still in at the apple shed, and 16th century cognac still that we had hand built for us in Tasmania by Peter Bailey, which the whole purpose of that is actually to make Calvados. So we're really hoping to put down as many barrels of that as we possibly can. It's a slow process, and it's a slow process to age it. But that's kind of my next big passionate project. Get something exciting happening with that. We'll be launching some of that this year. That's been down for over 3 years already.
Right.
But unfortunately, we've got very, very limited supply, having only done a couple of barrels a year for the last few years. So getting something, so most of that will just probably be sold at the apple shed. But that's pretty exciting. It's just long horizon stuff, really.
Yeah, that's really exciting. So Calvados being apple brandy, for those who haven't tried it, which is a pretty hard thing to get hold of in Australia, isn't it? I can't say I've seen one actually.
Yeah, no, there's a few around actually. It's quite surprising if you go into some boutique bottle shops. There is obviously a market for it, but it is very niche still. Obviously, have to know what to look for. It's not and where to look for it. But a lot of bars, a lot of really good cocktail bars will always carry, at least one behind on the back bar. So we're just thinking it'd be nice if we could not have it being French and have it being Australian instead. So yeah.
Oh, good. That's exciting. Something to look forward to.
Yeah, definitely.
So next thing is the Cider Awards. So just remind us again what's the date of that and location?
Yeah, so the awards, the judging's going to be taking place mid to late September at the William Angliss Institute. Then we will be having the awards announcements and dinner on Friday the 7th of October at Craft & Co, like I said, in Melbourne, in Collingwood. And then the festival will be the following day on the 8th, Saturday the 8th of October, in the Malthouse Theatre courtyard down in South Bank. So really excited about this new location for the festival. Really hoping we can have a great turnout there. I'm expecting we should, and I'm expecting we should sell out. So I'd advise people to get in early and get their tickets.
Oh, great. We're very much looking forward to it, and I hope to see you there. Yeah,
definitely. And look, I'd just probably like to say a big thank you to all of Cider Australia's sponsors, and I'm probably not going to remember all of them, but they've been very, very good to us over the years, supporting us. We are a volunteer-based organisation, but we still need funds to run these awards and run these festivals, and also to be able to, employ someone part-time to help us keep getting our message out there. So, Summer Snow Juice, Della Tafola, Vintessential's been a good supporter of ours. Kegstar, of course, been a big supporter of us for a long time. Appledale Processors. There's a number. If you just bear with me, I'll just keep remembering who we've got. So we really value the contribution that they make, because without them, Johnson Packaging, of course, how could I forget Johnson Packaging? They've been incredible, and then Lafort, of course, as well. So some really good, and Alapat Taylor as well. So some really good supporters of ours. They've helped us continue to get the message out there. They're all on board again this year. They're very excited about the direction we're taking. It means that more cider will be made in Australia. If we can get the message out there, more cider will be made in Australia using Australian-grown fruit. So that really benefits everyone, and I think that's something we should all be aiming for and hoping can happen. So,
yeah, it's a good message. I think the agenda and the things which Cider Australia are trying to achieve are massive, and they have very wide impact and also a very long-term impact on the industry and a lot of people. And it's important to recognise that doesn't just happen by accident. That needs a lot of effort and it needs funds, and it's awesome to see companies stepping up to sponsor. So yeah, thanks for the mention.
Yeah, no worries at all. I thank them again for sure. So
cool. All right. Well, thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you at the Cider Awards.
Yeah, no worries. Sounds good. Thank you.
So that was Sam Reid, President of Cider Australia and Managing Director of Willie Smiths. And hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense of some of the challenges that the cider industry is facing and what Cider Australia are doing about that and what the future holds for the cider industry. Lots going on and hopefully some big changes coming over the next couple of years. And also hopefully you're pretty excited about the Cider Festival coming up next weekend, Saturday the 8th of October at the Malthouse Theatre in Melbourne. Fully recommend that you come along to that. You're going to get the opportunity to try some of the best ciders in Australia. Going to be nearly 30 different cider producers there, and most of them have a number of different ciders as well. So lots and lots of different ciders to try, and some different masterclasses as well, where if you want to learn a bit more about cider. So lots going on. We will be there. Very much looking forward to it. We hope to see you there. Cheers.